All right. So, welcome, folks, to the Lake Superior Living Labs Network webinar series. We're really excited today to be joined by Dr. Susan Chiblow. The Lake Superior Living Labs Network is a Lake Superior watershed-wide organization, and we're aimed at creating projects and partnerships across the watershed to build well-being, both ecological and social. My name is Courtney Vaughn, and I'm a Métis woman from just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, and I'm one of the coordinators for the network. I'm a PhD student at Lakehead University focusing on Great Lakes health, and I'm joined here by our lead coordinator, Rachel Portinga. If Rachel wants to wave and quickly introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Rachel Portinga, she, her pronouns, and I'm another coordinator for the Lake Superior Living Labs Network, as Courtney mentioned. And we are always excited about anything related to social justice, ecological sustainability, health, and anything at those intersections. And we use the Lake Superior watershed as our setting to connect people and engage in that. And it's been a busy year internally for us, working on some new pieces around mission and vision, which will be coming out at some point. And we're looking forward to sharing that with everybody. And the best way to stay connected with us is through our newsletter. So if this is a new network to you and you're curious about learning more, I'll share a link to the website in the chat as we go on, and a link to the newsletters right at the top of a certain web page of the newsletter webpage. You can join that if you're interested. No requirement, of course, but that's where you can find more. But I'll turn it back to Courtney.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Susan Chiblow. I've been very fortunate to work with Sue for the last year or so, and it has truly been a joy. Dr. Susan Bell Chiblow is an Anishinaabe born and raised in Garden River First Nation, Ontario. She's worked extensively with First Nation communities for the last 30 years in environmental related fields. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology, a Master of Science in Environment and Management, and her PhD in Environmental Science, which focuses on Kendaaswin, or water knowledge. She has worked with the Chiefs of Ontario as the Environmental Coordinator of the Environmental Unit, and through her company, Ogima Anag, Sue continues to work with First Nation communities and elders as an Anishinaabe advisor on environmental projects and policy analysis. Dr. Chiblow is also a Vanier Scholar and an assistant professor at the School of Environmental Sciences at University of Guelph. She is also currently commissioner for the International Joint Commission, so lots on her plate. So without further ado, I'll leave the floor to you, Sue, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share.
Miigwech, thank you for the welcoming. Can I've shared? Yep, there we are.
You should be able to.
I've prepared a presentation, well, mostly with a lot of images, so there we go. Let me know if you can see it. I'm going to start.
Looks good.
There we go. Okay. Ani bonjour. Kinawea Suchiblow Dishnakazo Guma Anak Indigo Chachak Dodam Kataganti being and Dunjaba Kataganti being in Dogam. Anishinaabe Ojibwe and Dao. So my English name is Suchiblow. And today I'm going to be talking to you, and with you hopefully through some discussion afterwards about Anishinaabe Nibi Kendaaswin. And let's see if I can get it to move to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I like to position myself so people understand who I am. And this is one of my ancestors. This gentleman is Shinwalk, and my ancestor John Bell, who was also known as a McFarlane, married Shinwalk's daughter Marie, and that's on my father's side. And this is where that name Bell came from. And then on my mother's side, Charles LaRose married one of Shinwalk's granddaughters, and so through both of those, I have lineage connected me to the women through both of the Shinwalk on both sides of my family. And of course, Shinwalk had a vision back in the 1800s, and he was concerned about the survival and Minnebawadswin, the well-being of the Anishinaabe peoples. But he was equally conscious of the potential benefits of cross-cultural sharing and learning. And so he developed what is known now today as a strategic plan and a way forward for these people. And in his vision, he wanted an Akinamage Gamig, which is a teaching wigwam that lay at its core. And I'm a representative of that. I've grew up in my community. I participate in ceremony. I participated in governance events, all sorts of things from Anishinaabe. But I've also walked through the Western institution system. And as a positionality, these are the lands that govern me. When I'm at home, I have responsibility to these lands, not necessarily to the people, but to the lands, to all the animals, to the waters, to the beings, to everything that is on these lands. And we didn't have these imaginary boundaries that are now in place, as we needed to follow, or we had waterways, which were our highways, that connected us to other places. So I like to show this map because this is a beginning of us renaming and reclaiming our responsibilities to the lands. Today I'm calling you from Vancouver, British Columbia, which is the homelands of 3 different Indigenous nations, and I have a hard time pronouncing their names, so I'm not even going to do that. But when I'm in somebody else's territory, I also have responsibilities to those lands and responsibility to the peoples that have cared for these lands. And I wanted to acknowledge that I'm in somebody else's territory today. So before we get going and start sharing knowledge, I want to ask you, are you ready? You know, a lot of times we ask questions and we may not be ready for the answers. So learning is considered a personal journey towards wholeness, determined by the individual's own pace of development. And I love this quote by Bell, because this is about how we educate one another, how we share knowledge, how we tell our stories, how we have our own history, and how this is impressed upon an individual, and it's not a grading system. Each one of us will take away something from this today, hopefully, that is based on your own pace of development. And so, are you ready to actually accept what you're going to be taken away today? But also to be able to participate. And when I talk about participate, I'm referring to Anishinaabe, which is our language, the Anishinaabe Ojibwe language, because I'm not a fluent speaker, but I'm on my learning journey to becoming a more fluent speaker, and participating in understanding what you're learning and then being able to apply it by standing with the knowledge, and then by changing the narrative. So uplifting and actually valuing what you are learning. And I think this "Are you ready?" applies every day to everything that you're going to be learning. It may not necessarily be just about Anishinaabe Kendaaswin Min, but it is also about everything that we learn. And especially when it comes to Indigenous peoples, I'm sure everybody is aware of the atrocities that have happened to us. And how are you as an individual going to participate, accept, stand with that knowledge, and then change the narrative by uplifting and valuing it? So asking yourself, are you actually ready? Are you ready to understand the Bwin, the truth? Because we as Anishinaabe peoples, we were never discovered. We were definitely not lost, and we were not conquered in any of the wars. Our territories were not terra nullius, which means lands without people. We were here occupying these lands, governing ourselves, and never had to get permission to make treaties. And this comes from a Cree woman, Sharon Venn. And then Linda Smith says, before colonization, we were intact as Anishinaabe. We had absolute authority over our lives. We were born into and lived in a universe which was entirely of our own making. We did not ask, need, or want to be discovered by Europe. And I always start off with this truth because I think it's important to remember that the lands that we live on, the institutions that are now in place and teaching, a lot of times forget that this is a truth. And as Anishinaabe peoples, to really truly understand that we were here occupying these lands and governing ourselves, we were born into our own making. This was part of our world. And this world has peoples and governance systems have tried to erase our world. But I think it's just absolutely amazing that we are still here. We are still talking about this. We are being ready to uplift and to change the narrative to ensure that the future generations, and it doesn't matter what skin color they are, that they start to understand and to have that respect towards peoples of different nations with different systems, different governance systems, and different languages. So I want to acknowledge a whole bunch of my teachers before I start sharing information. I was born at Garden River First Nation. Well, I was born in Sault Ste. Marie and then grew up in Garden River on a piece of land which is known as Bell's Point. So it's surrounded by the St. Mary's River and then also the Root River. And I've always had a special relationship with water. And as I growed, I became more familiar with the ceremonies and the responsibilities. And my grandmother, Violet Jones, was one of the first people who started to instruct me in that and to instruct me into doing responsibilities. And then later in life, I've met numerous peoples, and one of the greatest teachers that I had met was Josephine Ballman-Damon. I also worked for the Chiefs of Ontario, and the Chiefs of Ontario is an advocating body for 33 First Nations in Ontario. And when I started to work for them, I was the first environmental director. And so they gave me, where our office is mandated by resolutions from the Chiefs in Assembly. And so they gave me all these environmental resolutions, and it was an enormous amount, a high stack of environmental resolutions that was really overwhelmed. So what I decided to do was to break them out into, we could say, the 4 directions or the 4 elements. And after I had broken them all out into those different directions and into those different elements, water was stacked as the highest. So decided to focus on water as the beginning, which really turned out to be amazing because we all come from water, and water is the beginning of our lives because we are all in that water lodge. And so what was born out of all of that work that we started to do was a water declaration of the Anishinaabe, the Mishkigawak, and the Ongwe in 2008. And this declaration can be found online, but it talks about the relationships to the waters, the conditions of the waters, the rights to waters and treaties, the rights of waters and self-determination. And key points out of that declaration are that women are the keepers of the water. There are teachings about respect and responsibilities, the spirits of the waters, the relationship with all waters, our laws and our protocols, and our ceremonies. And this is where I first met Josephine Ballman-Damon, is because I was hosting a series of water meetings across Ontario. And in Thunder Bay, she had come to the meeting, and her and another elder were the first ones to tell me that you need to have water here. You need to start doing those water ceremonies. And this was the beginning of another journey of learning about the waters for me. So I decided to do my PhD, which took me a really long time to decide to do because I really, really do not like the Western education systems. Was very frustrated with them from doing my master's and just thought, okay, I'm done. I'm not going there anymore. But met some Indigenous scholars who really tried to convince me that I needed to do that. And what I've done is I've always gone back to ceremony and I've asked the question, should I be doing my PhD? What is going to be the benefits of the PhD? Getting those 3 letters behind my name. And ceremony told me that I need to do what I need to do in order to better help our people. And this circled back to a teaching that I got from my grandmother, Violet Jones, when I was a young woman and I did not want to leave the reserve to go to school. And she had told me, no, you have to go. You have to go and learn and then come back and help your people. And this is supported by Basil Johnson, who also talks about it is our responsibility to step into a different world and understand that knowledge and then bring that home. And this also goes back to what Chief Shinwalk it had envisioned, is that having the skill set from the Western world, but also keeping our ceremonies and bringing those tools back into our people to better assist our people. So I decided to do my PhD, and because I'd already done so much work with the water and with elders and knowledge holders from the water, I wanted to better understand what Anishinaabe Kendaaswin our knowledge is on water in relation to Nakanagewin law and Nokomis Gisis, Grandmother Moon, in the Great Lakes territory for water governance. So I wasn't just focusing on one specific community. I was focusing on us as a community from the Great Lakes and ignoring that boundary that has been put in place by the settler governments. So this was an amazing journey of learning from so many different people and having those conversations. And COVID hit, so a lot of those conversations ended up turning to be like how we're working today on a platform that we can record. So I used Zoom and had a lot of conversations with people about Naknagewin, Nokomis Gisis, and Nibe. So when we think about Anishinaabe Kendaaswin, and you'll notice that when I'm in the title of the presentation, it said Kendaaswin. Now I'm using Kendaaswin. In my previous slide, it said Gi Kendaaswin. This is my understanding of, or the lack of my, or this is part of my learning journey on how to use our language properly, because when it's plural, it changes the word. When it's specific to me, it changes the word. When it's specific to us or to them, it changes the word. So as I'm learning, this is the reason being is why I have so many different versions in there, is because I'm still trying to learn. But when we think about our knowledge systems, our Kendaaswin, where does that even come from? And it comes from ceremony, from elders, but also too from direct observations and experiential learning. We also have visions and dreams that it comes from. Storytelling is another great transmission of our knowledge, but also it's specific to place. So I grew up in the area that I grew up in, and that's the knowledge I know of. I don't know the knowledge from the territory that I'm in today because I didn't grow up in this place. And it draws from all sources. I think this is so important to mention all the time, that the animals are our teachers. The sun, the moon, the lands, the waters, all of these beings are our teachers. And these are just some of the images of myself participating in ceremony, but also listening to elders and then participating in storytelling and then activities on the land, so that I have it was a way to decolonize myself, I suppose we could say, from being in those Western institutions and sitting inside a classroom setting and being lectured to. This was a different way of being out on the land. In the one picture with my Martin the Martian hat on, we were harvesting beavers and bringing them home. I was relearning how to skin them and then how to actually cook them and eat them. The other images, 3 of the images, are of me in participating in what was known as the Mother Earth Water Walk. This is Elder Ray Owl, who I have worked with and who is part of the traditional ecological knowledge elders of the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and they are the ones that call them themselves. And then this bottom slide with us being on the water was part of a ceremony of us demonstrating that we did not need permission from the US or the Canadian government to cross the shores from one piece of land to the other piece of land. And there's a bunch of us women that were inside kayaks. We weren't inside the main boat. But ultimately, when we think about our knowledge, it is about relationships, responsibilities, reciprocity, respect, and reflection. And Kimmerer, Archibald, Sinclair, and Dabosky are Indigenous scholars that have written about this. So if you want to find more information about it, and when we talk about our relationships, what is our relationship that we have with the water? What are our responsibilities to the water? And then how will we ensure that that is a reciprocal relationship founded on respect? But when we're out and we're doing activities, ensuring that we slow down and take that time to reflect on what we're actually learning and how we're learning it and how we want to continue to uplift what we're actually learning. James Dumont is he talked about the intelligence of the spirit, the heart, the mind, and the physical, and he talks about this is the form of Anishinaabe or indigenous intelligence. And when we talk about the spirit, the heart, the mind, and the physical, it's more encompassing than what Western science has. They typically only use the mind. And when we think about our intelligence and how we're using all four aspects of our being, and how more knowledge we gain when we actually use the four aspects of our being. So these are some of the teachings that I've learned, that we are water, we are Nibe. Our bodies are filled with Nibe. Some people say 77, some people say 8. Regardless of what that percentage is, we all have water. That the water is imbued with spirit and that it is a medicine. The water has water responsibilities, but the women have a responsibility to that water to be part of those ceremonies, to conduct those ceremonies, and that the water is connected to Nokomis Jesus, to the moon. The water can also collect knowledge, and that there are different types of water. There are the fresh, the salt, the sky, and the women's water. And when we look at this water cycle image, this is from a Western science perspective, but you don't see humans there. If you do a Google search, sometimes you'll see, some cows, but you don't see the fish. We see the sun, but we don't see the moon. And I like to point this out because when we understand that we are filled with water and we look at this cycle that is happening and how we fit into this cycle and how we are part of this cycle. And this came from a pine tree. I was sitting beside a huge pine tree one day, frustrated with the Western education system when I was writing my dissertation, and frustrated with how we have to quote in that type of system. And I had put my SEMA down and was kind of struggling with how I could continue to have and present the information that I had gathered from all of these amazing people. And this is what the tree showed me. But the tree actually showed me that I'm part of that water cycle. And so it showed me how the water goes up into the tree, gets relieved from the leaves, gets picked up, moves out throughout the sky world, comes back down to the grounds, goes back into the root system. And then it showed me how I'm connected to that same system, because how all of that water that cycles within the earth is continuously here. And so when we think about how the water is collecting knowledge, the water is traveling through all of the different beings. It has traveled through all of our ancestors, and it will travel into the future through all of those who are yet to come. And it travels through me. So when we want to think about how it is imbued with spirit, how we are filled with water, if we want to open up our mind and go back to what James Dumont talks about as the indigenous intelligence, and open up our hearts, open up our physical and our spiritual, and start to understand how we are part of this cycle, that we are not out above it or outside of it, that we are actually part of it, and how that connects us to the past, how it connects us to all of the animals, the birds, the plants, every being in a place, and how it will connect us to the future, to those yet to come, and how it collects that knowledge. So when we open ourselves, if we open ourselves up, and when we open up ourselves to that and start to understand that the knowledge that our ancestors had is still within us. And you hear the elders say, you have those answers to those questions. You just have to ask and it will come to you. And so having this shared with me is what some people would refer to as a vision, but I have asked permission, and when the pine tree showed me this, I asked permission if I could share this. And of course, the answer was yes, because we need to really start to understand that we are part of these water cycles, that we do not manage the water, that the waters actually are part of managing us. So going back to, and some people, going back to these different types of waters, some people say that there are four and some people say there are seven. We have the waters that come from the sky world, the waters that are on the land, so fresh and salt, but also too the importance of women's waters. Some people add that we also have those tears, which is another type of water. And what are the other ones? I forget the other ones. If somebody wants to put them in the chat, that would be very helpful because then I can refer back to that. But the point that I wanted to make out of these different waters is that we have the women's water. And when we look at these different Indigenous peoples' water declarations that are all over the world, there are the Indigenous Peoples Kyoto Water Declaration, which was one of the first water declarations that was actually written, was in 2003. And it states that we recognize, honor, and respect water as sacred and sustains all life. Our traditional knowledge, laws, and ways of life teach us to be responsible in caring for this sacred gift that connects all life. And so all of this water declaration in 2003 was the first one that brought together Indigenous peoples from all over the world and started to document what are our laws, what is our knowledge, and what is our understanding of those knowledges and how we actually actionize those knowledges. So in the water declaration of the Anishinaabe, Mishkigwak, and Ongwe, the conditions of the waters were pointed out as a huge, huge issue, that the waters have been contaminated and that actually violates our sacred laws that we have with the Creator or that have come from the Creator. We are told to eat one fish a week rather than following our own diets. And in some places, we're told we can't even eat fish at all. We are denied roles in the current water decision-making regimes, and all living beings are affected by pollution. Fish, animals, birds, insects, every being is affected by pollution. It affects our health, and it also affects our well-being. And when I talk about health and well-being, I'm referring back to what Jim Dumont talks about, the indigenous intelligence of our being. So not just our physical, but also our mental, our spiritual, and our emotional. And when this contamination and the conditions of the water changes, it affects our responsibilities to the water. It affects how we approach the water, how we see the water, and it also affects how we're actually starting to do ceremonies for the water. This is another declaration that was done in Treaty 3, and they too have documented after having several different meetings and ceremonies, that Nibe has spirit, Nibe is life, Nibe is sacred, and we need to honor, respect, and love Nibe. So one of the things that came out when we talk about how Nibe is sacred and we need to honor, respect, and love Nibe was that people talked about that duality of water. Water brings forth life, but water can also take life. And when we think about that in a context setting of just being out on the land, in the springtime, which is supposed to be happening right now, but we still have tons of snow in Sault Ste. Marie. But when those spring rains start to come and how it replenishes the life and wakens up life, and we start to see flowers, we start to see birds coming in, we start to see all these different things happening. So how that rushing of the water brings forth life in the spring, but also too typically with the rushing of the water, the women's water also brings forth life. But when we look at that duality and think about how much snow we've had in Sault Ste. in Garden River and Sault Ste. Marie areas, which is now going to potentially create flooding. So how that water will rush over the lands and take away life. And there have been many instances where our people and any human being and even animals have gotten too close to those rushing waters and have drowned. So having that respect and understanding that water also has that responsibility for duality, I think is very important, and we need to remember to have those types of conversations about duality of the water. And this is a water declaration from out in this territory. I do not know how to say that word, but it's from the Okanagan Nation, and they too talk about how they have accepted the unique responsibility bestowed upon us by the Creator to serve for all time as protectors of the lands and the waters in our territories, so that all living things return to us regenerated. When we take care of the land and the land and the waters take care of us. And they say that this is their law. So when we look at all of these declarations and when we say that as Indigenous peoples, yes, we are very diverse. We have different languages, we have different protocols, we have different ceremonies, but we also have commonalities, and that understanding that our responsibilities were given to us by the Creator. They weren't given to us by some regulation or some law that was invented by a settler government. And then one of those responsibilities is to serve as protectors so that the land will continue to provide and the water will continue to provide for us. These are commonalities regardless of where you're from as an Indigenous person. The water declaration from the chiefs of Ontario, so the Anishinaabe, Ongwe, and the Anishinaabe, Mishkigawak, and Ongwe water declaration talked about how we're water keepers. Women are the water keepers. We also carry the water, and we also carry these ceremonies. And what was really interesting about working on that water declaration is we were doing all different types of ceremonies for that declaration, but when somebody had said, you should really get some artwork done, and here's a person that you could speak to. So it was amazing when I called this individual. This is the image that she already had ready. She had said that she'd had a vision that somebody would be calling her, asking her about an image for the waters. And so she explained to me that this image, and when we think about how knowledge is also transmitted and how we as Indigenous peoples also use art, it's also in our songs, it's also in our dances. And this is the image of how we are on Turtle Island, how that moon has that relationship and can actually move the waters, but how there's the younger generation with the older generation learning together and learning about the responsibilities and those offerings that we make to the waters. And it was also important that there are it's not just a woman's responsibility, men also have a role. And men have that role to clear the way and to protect the women when we are doing these ceremonies. And she also talked about how that water flowing over those rocks and throughout the lands, and how there's a relationship that is there between those rocks and between the land, and how the water is picking up everything, traveling through the lands, but when it's going over the rocks and how it's being cleansed and ending up into an area that we could use as humans, and also you'll see animals as these different types of pools on where we can actually drink the water. So understanding that women carry the water because we carry that lodge, we have the choice to carry that lodge, that water lodge where life grows and life comes from. And so this gives us that responsibility to as a water keeper, but also to do and perform those water ceremonies, to transmit those water ceremonies to the younger generation, but also to this image reminding me of that responsibility that we have as women and our relationship that we have with the moon, with Nokomis Jesus. I think one of the really important points that we always need to remind ourselves is that water has a right to live responsibilities. So in the declarations, we talk about how we were given a responsibility to protect the waters, to do those ceremonies for the waters, but water was also given a responsibility. And water has every right to live those responsibilities just as much of a right as humans do. Water actually governs water. We think that as humans that we can control, manipulate, destroy the waters. And we see in this world today, when we do those types of damages, what actually is happening. Water is becoming so polluted that we can't drink it. Fish can't live in it. We can't eat the fish that are in it, even if they are able to live in it. And all of that damage that we are causing to the waters, we are interfering with that responsibility that the water was given. And so I think it's really important for us to step into that whole entire water cycle and understand that we are part of that and that water actually governs water. And we as humans do not have the responsibility to control, manipulate, or destroy the waters. We have the responsibilities to protect the waters and to do those ceremonies. These images go. One image is by Isaac Murdoch and Christy Belcourt, and they've given me permission to use all of their images. And the other one is I took a picture of the moon one night outside of my house. But I like to have these images in here as a reminder that we think a lot of times as humans we think that we're doing all of this controlling. But when we look at the moon, Nokomis Jesus, she is the only one that can actually move entire oceans. The only one. And so that connection that she has to the waters, that connection that she has to the women, and those responsibilities that she has, but that reciprocal relationship that we have in terms of our responsibilities in honoring her and our relationship with her. And then when we think about the waters and this image by Isaac and Christy, there are other beings that have responsibilities to the waters, to protect those waters. And our responsibilities as humans are also intertwined with those other spiritual beings. And how do we continue to honor those? Those are also part of the ceremonies that we need to remember, that we need to honor their responsibilities because they play an important role. So when we think about making decisions for water and remembering that water has the responsibilities, but so does the moon in the sky world, and so do these other spiritual beings. And when we think about designing a new water cycle image that is based on our knowledge and ensuring that we're including the spiritual beings and the moon as part of what that water cycle should actually look like. And that is water governance from an Anishinaabe perspective. Ami Craft, an Indigenous scholar, also talks about when the treaties were being made, there was in different areas, they talked about as long as the water flows. And Ami Craft has talked about how this term honors women and our life-giving powers. And so this was mentioned as part of treaty making to remember that the important role that women have, the important responsibilities that we have, because I'm sure we're all aware that when the Western world or the Europeans landed along the shores, our shores, they came with their own mindset. They came with their own colonial view. And a lot of the history that is written by colonial men. And they would only go talk to men. They didn't talk to women. And it was almost like it was an attempt to erase that knowledge that women have, to erase that responsibility and the roles and the importance of women within community. So Ami Craft, as a scholar, as a lawyer, reminds us that this was part of treaty making, and it wasn't something that we were trying to erase. It has been a colonial system that has tried to erase our knowledge and women. So when we talk about protecting waters, the old people talk about protecting all waters. And that means going back to whether there are 7 or 4 different types of waters, but going back to women's water and also protecting the women's water. So this is an image of J. Bell that was worked with me on the water walks, and he was walking as the protector and when we were carrying the water. And so having the men there understanding what their roles and responsibilities are also is very critical in protecting all waters. And we could talk for hours about how, the colonial systems have created so much confusion within our communities, and how we are having issues with that. But I think that when we show images like this and we talk about protecting all the waters, and we start to also share those responsibilities with the men without simply just excluding them, and start to share what their responsibilities are, because we are mothers and many of us have sons. And so in doing this, we become more responsible, and we are inclusive. We create a welcoming environment that is filled with kindness and compassion in protecting all of the waters, including the women's water. So protect and restore. We understand that water connects us to each other as humans because we all come from that water lodge, and it connects us to all life. Protecting water is protecting life. When we protect women's waters for now and into the future, we are protecting all life. We are restoring that balance. We have a responsibility that was created yesterday, and understanding it came from the past, but it is still here today, and how we move that forward into the future. And this is actionizing or doing something about the knowledge that we've created. And James Dumont, in his Indigenous Intelligence, talks about how our human vessels are water vessels that are walking around with a spirit inside, and how when we walk by a person, whether we know them or not, our spirits are saying hello to one another. And when we start to understand that when we're protecting today and tomorrow into the future, that this will actually help to restore that balance that is needed within our communities, or not just our communities, but within the world. So when we look at the world views on Nibe, I always like to share this slide because Anishinaabe, Nibi, Kendaaswin, we know that water is alive with spirit, but the Western world view looks at water as a resource. We know that water manages water. Western worldview looks at control and managing and interfering. We understand that water collects, carries, and transfers knowledge, and it lives its responsibilities. It has no bias. The water has no racism. It just provides life. We understand that it is a woman's responsibility, and that water is a medicine. In the Western worldview, it's primarily male dominated. When we take a look at all of the decisions that are being made about water, it is male dominated. They look at water as 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, so a chemical formula. We look at it as medicine. We also understand that the waters have different personalities with different spiritual beings, and they look at it as a watershed. So we also understand that Kinogigo Nabadoswin, that everything is connected, and that this goes back to understanding that when we truly start to understand that we are connected to all of the beings, that we are part of that cycle. We're not above it, and we're not outside of it. So when we talk about, okay, well, let's change the narrative. Are you ready to change the narrative? Are you ready to have that respect, to begin to collaborate, to create those welcoming environments of equality, to maintain the relationships that we're creating with, which I think leads into the importance of standing with our knowledge systems, standing with Indigenous Anishinaabe knowledge systems. So I challenge everybody to be radical. When I found out that I have got my PhD, it's like, oh, you can make up words. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to make up a word called radical. And this is based on restoring respect, responsibilities, and relationships. So reconciling our own relationship with the water. Those old people always talk about look inside. And so what am I doing to protect the water? I don't need to worry about what other people are doing. It's what am I doing? What am I doing with my responsibilities? And this will help honor and heal our relationships. It'll give healthy relationships, and we start to use heart knowledge. And this means that then we defend and decolonize. We defend the waters, and we decolonize ourselves to understand that we are interconnected, interrelated, and then we conduct these ceremonies. And that when we do our ceremonies, we create a welcoming and a collaborative environment to do that. That this is all based on actions, accountability, but also advocacy for the water, carrying that voice for the water. And that we need to listen to the waters, but we also need to listen to life. And that this is foundational for the love that we have for the waters. This is just a quote I like to use because when we talk about the Western world and the world that we live in today, and how women are not part of that decision making, how it's primarily male dominated. And this is a quote by Johnson and Wilkinson that says, by suppressing the inclusion of women in decision making, half of the world's brain power and change making is missing, so it sets us up for failure. And I think that's just an amazing, beautiful quote that really helps us understand the importance of having that welcoming environment that brings everybody to the table. And of course, it's just a beautiful picture of Josephine Baumann's. These are two other fun quotes that I like to share. David Suzuki says, the only people with a track record of living sustainably in a place for thousands of years are Indigenous peoples. And despite all of that has been done to get them out of the way, they are still here fighting for their land. And when we start to have non-Indigenous peoples respecting, uplifting, this is an example of one of these peoples, David Suzuki, that is doing that. And then I think every beach needs this sign. On the beach and in the sea, animals do not leave trash. Humans do. Please behave like the animals. Because when we think about the bigger picture in all of the world, it's only us two-leggeds that are causing all of the problems. We don't see, a bear trying to find nuclear energy to heat its cave and to watch, have 3 or 4 different TVs in its house or anything like that. It's only us humans that are doing that. None of the other beings are doing that. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and just introduce you to the International Joint Commission because it was mentioned that I am been appointed to this commission. So this commission works together for the common goal of the shared waters. We are an impartial, independent, binational Canadian and United States organization. So being impartial, independent means that we are not run by Canada or the US. We are independent of that. This organization was established in 1909 because of a Boundary Waters Treaty, which enables the cooperation of management and protection of the freshwaters, lakes, rivers, all along the shared border that is now in place. And we employ joint science-based fact-finding as foundation for building consensus and determining appropriate actions. And it fosters public awareness and affords all peoples a convenient opportunity to be heard. So the IGC has 2 responsibilities: pretty much review and approve certain projects referred by governments and setting conditions that affect the levels flows on either side of the boundary. And we also investigate transboundary issues and make recommendations. So it's important when we say we make recommendations to both the US government and the Canadian government, but in many instances, our recommendations may not be listened to for whatever political reasons there are. But the point of this is that these are all publicly available and the public is aware of these recommendations. So where do we actually operate? Right across from the West Coast to the East Coast, all of these water systems are part of decision-making recommendations to the government that we are part of. And one of the things with the IJC, so they have all of these different boards. So, for instance, there's a Great Lakes St. Lawrence board, and there are opportunities in all of these boards for Indigenous science and for Indigenous participation. There are opportunities where there are seats at the table if you choose to sit there. And I know in the past that there's been, different ideas on where we need to be as Indigenous peoples. But my teachings and my understanding of those teachings have been that we need to be everywhere. In order to make a difference, yes, we need those people that have those talents that can organize to do demonstrations. We need to have those people that have talents that can organize to do policy change. But we need to be inside every one of these systems, breaking them down from the inside or adding to them from the inside. So ensuring that our voices are at the tables in these decision making and making these recommendations. I like to show this slide. It has begun because many people have now been listening to their ancestors, listening to those waters, picking up those responsibilities, and starting to do that important work of protecting and sharing the knowledge that we have. Now, miigwech. I'm going to stop sharing. Now I can see you all and I can see myself. Oh, somebody posted that in chat. Oh, somebody said sap. Yeah. I think there's a lot of different types of waters. And some people talk about that seven-pointed star. I don't have enough knowledge to talk about that. I just need to learn that yet. So miigwech, everyone.
This is great. I've gotten a couple of text messages throughout your conversation, Sue. People are um, really excited to hear what you have to share. So, miigwech. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to share with Sue or with the group?
And knowledge.
Yeah. Charles.
I wasn't going to be, I didn't want to be the first, but nobody else was putting up their hand, but now anyways, I'll just ask my question. Hi, Sue. Thank you so much for all of that. I had a plan to do something else while I was listening, and I stopped doing something else and just listened. So that was very obviously very compelling. And yeah, lots of thoughts. So thank you so much. You said you were at the beginning of your talk, just when you were talking about yourself, you were talking a bit about your kind of hesitancy to come to the university. And I should just say, I'm a professor at Lakehead University. So, and I actually worked in the nonprofit sector and I on a farm for a long time. And you know, I have different but very similar kind of feelings about the academy and the university. And even though, I have, yeah, because of that, I was really compelled by some of your thoughts about some of the limitations and concerns about the university. So I guess my question is, I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to say a bit more about like how you see maybe the university specifically as a place where like maybe how it's changed or how it hasn't changed and what the opportunities are potentially because this is a question I'm like rattling around in my head all the time is the role like the way we can maybe use change like be radical as you kind of suggest to kind of push universities to be more I guess to just be like to listen more to take to be a place where different ways of knowing and different knowledges can be kind of more like incorporated or used or anyways all of that stuff like I'm wondering how you're thinking about that because you obviously come from a place where you talked about being hesitant and now you're here and you've been in it for a while and yeah how are you feeling what are you thinking about all of that.
I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think that one of the amazing thing is the young people and or people going into the Western institutions. A lot of them feel that same way. And I'm an assistant professor at the University of Guelph in a program, so I'm always bringing the students outside because it's like if we're going to go talk about that tree. Let's go see the tree. Just go build that relationship with the tree. And I think there's so many opportunities. And I think that a lot of these opportunities aren't coming from, it was my idea to do this. There's so many scholars that have talked about experiential learning, place-based learning, being out on the land, learning from the land. So I think there's opportunities to be able to do that more often. And it doesn't have to be extravagant. All of the universities, especially in Canada, because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, had made recommendations about education. So most of the universities have somebody in place that is trying to decolonize the university. So I think there's opportunities for professors, students to be able to participate in all of these events that are happening on campuses and learning about that. And I think it's an opportunity too for professors who may not know about it to encourage their class. Here's something that you can attend and write an assignment on, whether it be science, whether it be water monitoring, or whether it be social justice. There's all kinds of opportunities I feel that are in the university. It's just a matter of us taking the step to implement them. And that goes back to a lot of the old people talk about, they talk about how we need to actionize what we're actually doing. And it's the responsibility of each individual. So when we're inside these universities and understanding that we are in a place of privilege, we are in a place of power. So how do we turn that privilege and power into something that is more inclusive and a more welcoming environment? Thank you for that.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Sue. Melinda.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation, first of all. Okay, my question was about, I was hoping for you to elaborate a little bit more in terms of like the woman's water, like just more deeply, like what it is exactly, and then what it is exactly, and also how does that connect to a society where like the concept of gender is changing, or like how does woman's water also connect in a society where like the construct of gender is drastically changing? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense because a lot of people have asked me that. So when I'm talking about women's water, I'm talking about the women that decide to bring forth life. So they'll have a baby inside the water lodge. And inside that water lodge, typically what happens was that when you go into labor, the water comes forth, rushing in that life. A lot of times that doesn't happen anymore because of just hundreds of different reasons why that doesn't happen. But we all come from that water. We are all born into that water, and then we come from that water. We grow in that water. Typically it's supposed to be 40 weeks that we stay in there, but it varies. So when I refer to the water, I refer to that. I find it really interesting to have these conversations about the diversity or gender diversity because this is not something new to Indigenous peoples. But we don't, in our language, there is no he or she. There is a word for both. So we're not separating she from he. There's a word for both. And that word is what we use for individual. And so thinking about the English language and how that has really damaged how we are inclusive and how we create welcoming environments by creating all of these divisions amongst who we are, or putting us into colonial boxes, dividing us because we have different colored skin, dividing us because we like apples or somebody else likes chickens. Like there's so many ways that they have actually divided us. So trying to go back and look at those overarching commonalities that we all come from the water. But when I am, my understandings from some of the Anishinaabe teachings is that we've always had gender diversity. And you can actually I did a woman's course at Michigan State University. And one of the things that I taught there was that, you look at all of the women in the past who were in male dominated roles. So there were women in the past who were warriors. And when we think about this, we are very practical people. Would I be able to have a child and be a warrior? Most likely not, because then I'd probably get, hurt the child. So thinking about all of those, that is the diversity that we had from the past. And with the introduction of that different mindset, it's really changed it. And it's also divided us into different sections where we all don't we need to go back and understand that, guess what, we all bleed the same way, we all have a heart, we all have a brain, we all have specific things that we need to do, we all need to eat and drink water. And so how do we bring those things back to create a welcoming environment where everybody feels welcome? And as Anishinaabe people, I think a really important teaching is that we all have a unique set of skills, and bringing those skills into the circle for the collective of humanity, or the collective of Indigenous peoples, or the collective of whomever, and having that respect that everybody has a unique skill set, and that it goes back to, again, that we're all part of that circle. Just because I have 3 letters behind my name does not put me above anybody. I'm still part of the circle. And I think that's really, really important. Those types of teachings are really important to bring us back into a welcoming and a good environment where we can share our skill set and respect our skill set and have that understanding of the uniqueness that every individual has. There's a teaching, it was really funny. I was in a ceremony, and the conductor had asked me to speak for the water and to sing a song. And so I said, okay, I can do that, yes. But I want you to understand, and one of the teachings was that every single one of us was given a very unique voice. That goes back to our unique skills. When I speak, when I'm in ceremony and I'm singing that song, the Creator knows that that is me, because that's the voice that He's given me. And so I wanted to mention to everybody in the ceremony that with that unique voice that He's given me, it sounds more like a crow, not like a canary or like a robin. So I'm trying to warn everybody that my voice, my skill set does not necessarily mean that I have the voice that can carry that beautiful high note, but I still have that ability to share that voice. So I think it's really important when we start to understand some of those and accept that my skill set is not singing, but I'm still going to sing. I just may not do it in public, and I'm probably not going to make money from it. But yeah, thank you for that question. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much.
Kristen, and we have a question in the chat.
Oops. Let me look.
Sorry, Kristen, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, yes. Sorry. I couldn't tell who was talking to me. Sorry. Yes, and I am Kristen. Sorry, I was Charles for a while. I think I looked in using Charles's link, and so my name was Charles Lefko. But I'm a prof in environmental studies at Queen's University, so I'm in Kingston. I really, really enjoyed this talk. I also I was reflecting a lot upon what you said, Sue, and then I was thinking a little bit more about like the IJC at the end that you mentioned, because I also sit on one of those boards. And I've gone to some of the events where you're a commissioner, which is great. I'm really glad that you're there. But I guess my question was, I'm just thinking about, I was thinking about this question of kind of transboundary governance, and cooperation, and kind of the current sort of political context, or kind of, crisis this time, right? When a lot of, there's a lot of rhetoric and also action around not maintaining these types of cooperative relations for shared waters, right? And I guess my question is just, given that, and I think we're certainly are going to see probably the United States play potentially a much lesser role in some of those agreements and responsibilities that, while those, arrangements and institutions aren't perfect, have certainly contributed to helping to maintain healthy waters. So in that context, I'm just wondering about, and you've kind of spoken all around this, but I guess just more specifically thinking about like what are the other sources of like collective action, diplomacy, like networks, like things we need to be keeping in mind and acting on individually and collectively right now in this particular moment.
Yeah, thank you. And that's such a great question because it's a conversation that we should be having everywhere. What is it that we need to do? How is it? But I think that, specific to the IJC, a lot of these boards have established relationships. The political beings of the time and how they decide that they want to do stuff cannot damage the relationships that we have built. When it comes to the Indigenous peoples being at the board, at the table, for me, I remember having a conversation with the elders, and like, this is not new, is what they said. This is not new that we have a government that's trying to erase us. We've been through this before. We know how to continue to move through this. And now it's an opportunity because a lot of non-Indigenous peoples are feeling that panic, are having that fear, are having those emotions that go with that type of leadership, where we as Anishinaabe people can also step up and show how we have dealt with these types of issues and how we're probably going to continue to deal with them into the future. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to be higher level leaders in these conversations and to have to demonstrate how we've gotten over some of these emotions, how we've continued to collaborate, and regardless of what, if the government says, whatever rule that they come up with, just understanding that our relationships are governed by ourselves. They're not governed by another human being that's trying to tell us what to do and when to do it and how to do it, because we still have freedom of choice, which is something that nobody can take away from us at this point. So I think that some of those will continue to provide us with immense opportunities as Indigenous peoples to demonstrate just how awesome we actually are. Miigwech for the question, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. It's fantastic. I appreciate it.
We have one question in the chat, Sue. I appreciated you this is from Vincent Salgado. I appreciated you being honest about how Western reductionism has desecrated our water relative to just a chemical formula that lacks moral responsibilities. How can Western science change its foundational cosmology and/or ontology to take water from a resource to be managed to a relative to care for and cherish?
That's a great question, Vincent. Thank you for that. I think that this just goes back to individual responsibilities, individual teachings, individual understandings. There are so many people that we look around that are looking at Indigenous peoples to understand their cosmology, their ontology, our knowledge systems, and are starting to understand that everybody has a water story and that everybody comes from water, and sometimes our water stories may not be as happy as we want them to be, but we all have those stories. I think that the old people have told me, and then it's amazing to work with the young people because they haven't been impressioned upon so much that they're moving forward with just one worldview. They are very much more open to understanding and respecting other people's worldviews. So I think that it's important for us to also generate these conversations and to share this knowledge with the younger generation, who are then going to move into these water decision-making positions, who are then going to be out there working with the water, whether it be through Western science or Indigenous science, and they're the ones that are going to make the change. So right now I see my responsibility more as being an educator as it is to trying to force people to change their worldview. And this goes back to, I think that if we use kindness and we continue to create that welcoming environment, then of course people are going to have an understanding of the difference between Western science and Indigenous science. And I always mention to people, I always ask them, especially the Western, the really hardcore Western science people, I ask them, how old is your science? And then how old is indigenous science? When did Western science come to these lands? And when we talk about place-based knowledge, when did Western science come to these lands and start to do the work that they do? When was indigenous science here? How long has indigenous science been doing the work? So then I asked them, so what is the logical reason why these two sciences would not come together? Why you would not bring knowledges from different peoples to the table to make your decisions? Why would you continue to focus on only one science? And it makes them, it really helps people think. And that goes back to that inclusivity, and that we all have unique gifts, and to bringing this back to the table so that all of us can bring our gifts to the table, so that all of us can address the issues that we as humanity have created. I hope that's helpful.
Natalia, we have a question from you.
Yeah, the question tries to combine, it builds upon what Vincent and Kristen had asked, and thank you so much for the presentation. Academics being in track 2, myself coming from Our Living Waters as a network engagement lead, I'm in track 3, so this is with nonprofits. I'm looking at how we can use freshwater ecosystems, like the integrity of freshwater ecosystems and Great Lakes governance as a framing at this particular time that's a bit fractured. And so I was looking at your slide on worldviews and was hoping for a bit more clarity on that difference between the different personalities and the watersheds. Because watersheds was the framing I was trying to encourage people in towards physical integrity of the watersheds as a thing that connects all of us. It's living and the living system.
Yes, great question. So my understanding of my understanding was greater peaked, I would say, through Josephine Ba Van Damen. She was a grandmother who walked around all of the Great Lakes, and then did numerous other water walks. And one day when we were walking, she was talking about the heaviness of the water and how Lake Ontario was much more heavier than Lake Superior was. And when the next day in the newspaper, it came out that there was a new methodology, and I don't know if it was DNA sequencing or whatever, new Western science, that discovered that water with a whole bunch of contaminants in it, compared to water with less contaminants in it, are going to be different. And then there was another study that came out that showed that when you have a river system or a lake and you don't manipulate that environment so much, and you have, pine trees growing around it, what's in the water is going to mirror those pine trees. So we know that pine trees, through Western science, are more acidic. And so the water is going to be more acidic. So those beings living in that water are going to be in a more acidic environment that are susceptible to that. And so those are some of the understandings, that those waters have different personalities. And as Indigenous peoples, we always knew this, and we also understood it, but we also talk about the different personalities in terms of what beings actually live in that water. So there is a being that is referred to as Mijibiju, which is out in Lake Superior. And Mijibiju is, it means lynx serpent. And there are some pictographs that are on up on rocks up in that area that show actually what the serpent looks like. And so that Mijibiju is specific to Lake Superior. And it's not the same one that you'll find in Lake Ontario. And so that's also, that spiritual component is also part of understanding that the waters have different personality. But if we want to look at it just strictly from a scientific Western perspective, then we look at what's in the water and how that personalities from the waters are different. And so when we think about a watershed, and we look at all of the different river systems that go into a watershed, So say it's in primarily the Canadian Shield, which has maples, birch, and pine trees, and are supposed to, unless we went and wiped those all out of there. And how those all flow into one another, and how they all interconnect, and so how they all have different personalities connecting to become one big collaborative when they hit Lake Superior. But it was still, Lake Superior is going to be different than Lake Ontario, even though Lake Superior will travel and carry knowledge and messages to Lake Ontario. Does that help you understand that different personalities better?
Yes, that's very beautiful and adds so much more flourish to the idea of a watershed.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Miigwech for all your questions. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share or ask Sue? Rachel?
Sue, thank you so much. I have taken many notes and am feeling grounded and inspired and lots of thoughts still circling. And I'm wondering, I was really interested in your radical definition and words that came with that, and really aligned with a lot that I think that a lot of us are trying to maybe do personally and as this network, and your terms that you put together. I think I'm wondering if there's a place we can read more about that, or do you have any writing on that, or is that an idea that that we can learn more about directly through you, or how might we learn more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should actually write just about that, but I haven't. But there are different articles that I have written.
Okay.
And remembering too that, I always tell people all of 99, well, I'll say 100% of what I share is not mine. It's come from so many other people, and I'm just sharing my understanding of it, which then may help somebody else's understanding. But there are many scholars that have written, like one of my like Basil Johnson is by far my favorite, and he was not considered an Indigenous scholar because he didn't have a PhD. But I refer to his books so often because they just make so much sense. Jim Dumont is not considered an Indigenous scholar because he doesn't have those three letters behind his name. But the words that he shares and the things that he have written, and when you Google him and listen to some of the conversations or podcasts that he has, they're so amazing. We look at Sean Wilson, who talks about research is ceremony. And when we talk about life and when we're in ceremony, and the elders will say, life is ceremony. And when you start to understand that life is ceremony, it helps your whole entire being walk through the world differently and respecting other individuals differently. So I have a few papers out there, but that's just to mention some of mine. And me craft, like on the slides that I shared, she has a website. It's about decolonizing water, and that's all Treaty 3 work. And I just, another person I love is Sherry Copenance. She's a grandmother from Treaty 3, and been able to work with her for many, many years, and just sharing knowledge and having so much fun doing it. Oh, she's, the humor. It's so important for us to remember to laugh at ourselves. And yeah, I think that we learn a lot better when we're in an environment where we can actually have humor. So there are so many different people out there. There's another great website out there that, I think is really a lot of fun is, and I knew about this website because of one of the master's student. I sat on her committee when she graduated from the University of Guelph, and then she got back in touch with me after she scored a job. And it's Bimagami, and they created this great big map that people can actually walk on, and it has all those little QR codes and interactive stuff like that. And they actually give that, you can borrow the map or you can buy one for your school or whomever you're working with and tote that around with you. And I think, they have Indigenous names and they have stories. It's just, there's so much information out there. I think it's absolutely fabulous. And there's the teachings that the old people talk about is that one person cannot know everything. It's just too much power. It would destroy you. So I'm always trying to constantly remind people that there are so many other people out there that have the understandings that I have, that have participated in the ceremonies that I do, but have also thought about these because I just think that, indigenous peoples are like the smartest on the world. When we talk about, Socrates and all those other Greek dudes that were philosophizing, we were philosophizing way before they were philosophizing. We just didn't call it philosophizing. So I just think that, there's a lot of opportunities out there for us to learn from other people and not just myself. And I'm really glad and honored that you've asked me to be in this space for this amount of time, given me this amount of time. Normally you're given 20 minutes.
It's been honestly a pleasure, Sue. It's always great to hear what you have to share, and it sounds like a lot of people have a lot to reflect on after what you shared. It's been well received. So truly miigwech. And anytime you want to share something, we'll get the people together.
Awesome, miigwech.
Before we head out, folks, just as a reminder, we will post this recording. But again, miigwech, Dr. Chiblow, miigwech, Sue, this is so fabulous. I'll let Rachel end with a couple of closing words just on some future events, and then we'll let you all folks go.
Yeah, miigwech, Sue, so much. Truly have appreciated everything you've shared with us. As Courtney said, the recordings will be on our website. We have a page for all of our, I think we call it video recordings. Also, if you're on our newsletter, that will be emailed directly to you. So the link to join that is in the chat. And in response to Kristen's earlier question about kind of connected to that, we are, as a network, planning to host an event, a virtual event that connects people both around all the Lakes Superior and beyond as well, but really thinking about how we bring in care and compassion and relationships, particularly in this time when there's a bit of hostility across the US-Canada border in particular. And so how do we kind of return more to this relational way of being with one another? And so we're hosting to facilitate an event, which is, just one drop in the bucket, but how can we build that together? So if that's of interest to you, we will be sharing details. We don't have a specific date yet, but we're hoping for May and hoping to help connect people around the water that way. So we just wanted to flag that for you.
All right. Well, thanks, Rachel. And we got you again, Sue, and hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. And be kind, be gentle to yourself, and hopefully get some laughs in too, like Sue said. Hopefully get some humor in today. All right, we got to take care, folks.
Mama Pig Wobmin, everybody.
Bama Fisu.